All right, welcome everyone to the Automation Study Group. Today we have very popular speaker, Tim Warner. Tim is a speaker and trainer for Pluralsight and O'Reilly's. He has published hundreds of videos and trainings. Tim, we're so happy to have you here. You know, he joined the Microsoft now, and he has 25 years experience with MCT and former MVP. And today, Tim's going to talk about getting started with Sentinel. Tim, over to you.
Okay, Claudia, thanks a lot. Yes, hi everybody. I'm so happy to be back with you. I work for Microsoft as a content developer, and Steve and I were chatting before we started about what does that mean? It's just basically a writer. I'm one of the writers in Azure Docs. Specifically, I'm attached to the Azure Policy and Azure Governance teams. All right, so this session, I figure I'll present about 30 or 40 minutes or so on Microsoft Sentinel. Just a quick start to make sure that by the end of this 30 or 40 minutes, you have a really nice general understanding of the service, and you're well along the way to deploying and configuring it if you're interested to for your purposes, your team's purposes, your customers' purposes, whatever. All right, so let's see here. Yes, I want to start with the use case and differentiating Sentinel from Microsoft Defender for Cloud because I found in my work as a tech trainer specifically that the frequent name changes that we have here at Microsoft, they result in customer confusion, and there's no exception here in this case. So I want to make sure we differentiate those. Then I'm going to do an extended demo where we create a Sentinel workspace, we load up some connectors, look at analytics rules and threat hunting. So it should be a good high impact session. If you'd like a copy of the slide deck, you should find it already in the chat panel. And any questions, comments, concerns, one reason why I want to cut my presentation a bit short is I want to make sure to answer any and all questions that you might have, okay? Now, the slides are largely from one of the Microsoft official courses, so I want to provide attribution, and we at Microsoft have access to those mocks anyway. It's their SC200, which is aligned to one of the Microsoft Security and Compliance certifications. It's Microsoft Security Operations Analyst. Of all of the Azure certs, I think that one is the one that has the most coverage of Microsoft Sentinel on it, in my experience. All right, so I had mentioned a couple things, trying to solve for some confusion. First of all, with product naming. Let me bring up my drawing tool here. Hang on a second. Go away. There we go. First, there's the name itself. Microsoft Sentinel was originally called Azure Sentinel. And we've seen that, or at least I've seen that with quite a few services where they start their life with Azure in the name, and then it becomes obvious, wait a minute, the utility of this service goes far beyond the Microsoft cloud or hybrid cloud, so why limit it to AZ or Azure? It's Microsoft Sentinel. Okay, cloud native SIM, what's that? Security information event management is SIM, if memory serves. And oftentimes you'll see on the marketing pages Sentinel called SIM SOAR, SOAR. And if memory serves, SOAR stands for Security Orchestration and Automated Response. So the elevator pitch here is that this is a service that competes directly with other enterprise class security platforms like Splunk Cloud, for example. And I like to describe it as a one-stop shop for your InfoSec people for their entire hybrid cloud, multi-cloud security operations. Again, the term Microsoft Sentinel as opposed to Azure Sentinel, I think is very well placed, and that will become obvious, I think, when I get to the demo. A lot of the marketing literature you see on Sentinel breaks it down into these four pillars. I think that makes sense. We have under the hood a service called Log Analytics. So this is a log ingestion service. So you can basically point all of your data sources, whether they're servers or routers or switches or firewalls or whatever it is where you want to gather security information, you can send those data sources into your Sentinel workspace and aggregate the data there. Once there, you'll find that there's a whole bunch of tools that help customers detect issues. These could be vulnerabilities that haven't yet been patched in your infrastructure. They could be anomalous behavior, customers or people who are consuming and processes who are consuming your applications. Is there suspicious or anonymous behavior? And not only can you do proactive threat hunting and threat modeling, we can set up automatic analytics rules that do the work for us. I mean, when you think about it, as human beings, I mean, we've got to sleep at the very least. It's nice to put automation in place where possible, definitely. You're going to see Sentinel has a built-in investigation engine where you can track if you do happen to have an incident. You can work on it collaboratively using what are called Jupyter notebooks. And then, as I said, there's quite a bit of focus on automated response. All right. You're going to see that there is a fair amount of Azure knowledge that's presumed when you're using Sentinel and you get below the surface. Okay, I want to pause here to address that question of Microsoft Sentinel versus Microsoft Defender for Cloud. As a matter of fact, why don't I log into the portal and let's head on over to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So here I am in the Azure portal, signed in as an administrator. Now, again, potential point of confusion still for some customers. Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you might recall, used to be called Azure Security Center for the longest time. And still now out in the marketplace, you see references to ASC. I want you to, if you haven't already begun the transition to map ASC or Azure Security Center over to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And that term Microsoft Defender is kind of loaded because in between this service being called Azure Security Center and Microsoft Defender for Cloud, it was called, wait for it, Azure Defender. Yeah, so uh, Defender is overloaded because there's a whole suite of Microsoft 365 services that focus on different aspects of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud security, and that's what's called the Microsoft 365 Defender product family. So yeah, it's not a joy presenting on that subject simply because of the naming confusion. But in summary, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, the way I like to position and describe this is that it's for everybody. It's for your developers, your administrators, your architects, your security people. You don't have to necessarily be a full-time InfoSec professional to improve the security posture of your hybrid cloud environment in here. You'll find that in Defender for Cloud, there's a bunch of recommendations that as long as Azure can see the resource, it can give you security recommendations where you can improve this arbitrary value called a secure score. Again, you don't have to be a full-time degreed or certified InfoSec professional to understand some of this. Pretty straightforward. Apply system updates. Well, that seems pretty reasonable. And a lot of these recommendations, you can actually do a quick fix where Azure can implement the recommendation for you live. So I want you again to think of Defender for Cloud as a way for everybody on your team potentially to contribute to improving security in your environment, and that Defender for Cloud can reach not just within Azure, but can go out into an on-premises data center. For instance, if you've onboarded machines in your local data center using Azure Arc, Arc-enabled servers can get scanned and get recommendations. Other clouds, you might have EC2 virtual machines in Amazon, for instance. You can bring those in just by installing an agent called the Log Analytics Agent, also called the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, also called the Azure Monitor Agent, well, I'll stop there. So anyway, given that, now let's focus in on Sentinel and understand, well, wait a minute now. This Defender looks pretty good. You're saying it's not for dedicated security people. Well, we do have a dedicated InfoSec team that does red and blue team testing, blah, blah, blah. Is this good for them? Potentially, it's okay, but Sentinel is really the go-to for full-time InfoSec people. And you don't have to watch two environments when you deploy Sentinel. See, that's really the heart of the matter. Here, let me use like a Venn diagram to describe this. What we're going to see is that your Sentinel workspace can ingest and process your Azure, whatever we were just looking at, Defender for Cloud. So we can bring our Defender for Cloud stuff into Sentinel. You might think, well, I'm used to looking at sign-in logs and audit logs in Azure Active Directory. Do I now need to go to two places? No. We can bring all of our Azure Active Directory log data in here. And the list goes on and on and on and on to the different connectors that we have available in Sentinel. Isn't that great? So to kind of co-opt the Lord of the Rings, it's one security monitoring platform to rule them all, no matter where your resources are. Now, specifically to get started with Microsoft Sentinel, the prerequisites are number one, you're going to need an Azure subscription, right? Number two, you're going to need a log analytics workspace. Log analytics, if you don't know, is a cloud hosted log ingestion engine, massively scalable. Microsoft built a query language called Kusto, Kusto, also called KQL for Kusto Query Language, that it should be familiar to you if you've used SQL, structured query language, or if you've used the Splunk language or the Amazon log search language. And you use that single query language potentially to reach across your entire hybrid multi-cloud. Why? Because all of the logs from those data sources have been ingested into your workspace. Now you'll notice that I have two workspaces here, and this is a practice I would tell customers. I've got an infrastructure workspace for my non-security stuff and a dedicated workspace for Sentinel. So good reasons for that. That's another whole subject. There's some slides in this, there's at least one slide in the slide deck that talks about architecture, but it really doesn't get into it too much. But the big deal is they have different focuses. If I click into my TW log analytics that I use for infrastructure monitoring, if you come down here, you see options like computer groups and linked storage accounts and usage, stuff that's very infrastructure-y, for lack of a better term. But once you've got Sentinel running on a workspace, you're going to find that the user interface is dramatically different. I mean, it's the same interface for the log analytics part, but on top of it, the Sentinel engine, very different. So you've got your log analytics workspace. The next step is to create an instance of the Sentinel service. You can see I've already created one that I landed on top of that dedicated log analytics workspace that I created whenever I did a few days ago. But notice that when you go to create a Sentinel instance here in the portal, it's unavoidable. Add Microsoft Sentinel to a workspace. But fortunately, the portal user interface allows you to create the workspace on the fly. I'm pretty sure you can do all this using an Azure Resource Manager JSON template or Bicep. I know that there's some exceptions in Azure, some things you can't use templates for. I'm almost 100% sure you can automate this creation process using a deployment template. And notice also that the Sentinel offers a 31-day free trial to get started. So for prototype, test, dev, initial discovery, there's a good full month-long trial going on here. All right, so let's now come into the workspace resource that I created. And like I said, it's a completely different UI from the underlying log analytics situation. Now, I pre-created some connections, some data connectors, so we could have something to look at. But if we just inspect some of this stuff off the top on the overview page, we can see an event ingestion, we can see alerts and let me try that again, alerts and incidents. This is an important distinction I want to differentiate. An alert is an individual occurrence of something. Maybe somebody sees that you've got a Azure VM with a public IP, so they attempt a remote desktop protocol connection and they don't have credentials, so they're trying multiple times. Those individual accesses might be, that would be logged as alerts. But what we have is what's called a fusion technology. Microsoft calls it fusion. It's basically a machine learning backed, an artificial intelligence backed service that's able to inspect the alert stream that's coming into Sentinel and correlate them together. Think of how useful that is. If you do have a breach, Do you want to look at a whole list of hundreds and hundreds of individual alerts and try to figure out which ones are related? I don't. So, a huge value proposition here is that fusion engine and the ability of Sentinel to stitch together these alerts, and then you create an investigation and you can map out the story. Okay, this person discovered a public IP. They did 100 failed RDP logon attempts, but they got in. This one was successful. Once they were in, they're looking for elevation and lateral movement, and you can see that as it's going through. Really useful stuff. So like I said, I just wanted to call that out. And then we can see over time some historical info, potential malicious events. A lot of the graphics are pretty cool, including like geo maps where you can easily see and drill in when events happen around the world. But what would you want to do after you first create the Sentinel workspace? Because when you come in here initially, all this is empty. Your first order of business for configuring Sentinel is to load up your data connectors. So we can march down here under configuration data connectors, and you'll see we have an ever-growing list of connectors. Now, many of these are some from Microsoft. Many of these are from third-party vendors. And I don't know if Microsoft allows community contributions in here. I'm thinking not. I noticed that there's now a section in your Sentinel called Content Hub. It looks like it's in public preview. And this looks similar to the data connector idea, and I'm suspecting that this might have community contributions over time. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not a member of that engineering team, so I don't have a whole lot of insight, unfortunately. But if we go back to data connectors, here where you want to think about what it is that you're looking to monitor. And hopefully it makes sense that you'd probably want to look at Azure first. So you can do a filter here and start to call up some of these connectors. Hopefully it also makes sense that the Microsoft connectors are the easiest to set up because you're already in Azure, presumably, and you would need to have appropriate RBAC permissions, which you'd specify at the log analytics level. You can go into the access control IAM. There are some built-in RBAC roles if you want to give somebody just read access to the workspace, which makes sense. Okay, so if we want to bring in Azure Active Directory, you can see here who the provider is. I've actually hooked mine up, so it says that the last time it ingested data was 4 minutes ago. If I scroll down, you'll see that each of these data connectors not only gives you an authenticated API connection to that service. In this case, we want to ingest data from our Azure AD tenant, but they also are bundles of related content. This can really accelerate your team's efficiency using Sentinel, okay? It gives you some number of out-of-box workbooks, KQL queries, and analytics rule templates. And I'll explain in more detail what those are, but this could be very beneficial because, if you're like me and you're first looking at a service, you're like, where do I start? You're going to see that these workbooks are curated collections of different data views that the vendor, whoever it is that created the data connector, has found to be highest impact. Same with queries and same with analytics rule templates. So anyway, you open the connector page for each connector and you simply follow the instructions. As I said, the Microsoft ones are the easiest to do because a lot of times you're already authenticated. All I have to do to wire up Azure AD is to choose which logs I want to see. As you can tell, there's quite a bit that's in public preview. But anyway, that's that. So let me close out of this one. My drawing tools are getting in my way. What was something else we were looking at? How about the Defender for Cloud? Defender, there it is right here, see? And you'll see that there's built-in data connectors, not only for Microsoft Defender for Cloud, what we were just looking at, but also if you're embracing some of those other Microsoft 365 products like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps. You can bring all of that data. Now, that to me is huge impact because otherwise you're going to each of these management portals or admin centers separately, and each has their own list of alerts and their own list of analytics rules. Not very optimal, it seems to me. Here we can bring and surface that data in one spot. with that same motif, like I mentioned. You open the connector page and follow the instructions. Each one is going to be specific, but like I said, the Microsoft ones are easiest to hook up because it's Microsoft. Now, what about hybrid cloud, multi-cloud? What if, for instance, for business continuity and disaster recovery, you're deploying your applications into Amazon? As you can see, Amazon itself has contributed these data connectors to Microsoft Sentinel. So we can bring in our CloudTrail audit logs here. And again, you get related content for each. Or if you're just storing file or object data in the simple storage service at Amazon, you can bring that in. So the list goes on and on. I mentioned that the connectors library is ever growing. And you'll see if I just slowly start to scroll through here, you can see a lot of different popular vendors from the Apache HTTP server, as far as firewalls and that kind of stuff. We've got Barracuda, we've got Cisco, a lot of Cisco in here, Citrix. So ideally, the services that your customers have in their hybrid cloud environment are covered by these connectors. And I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that the API for creating connectors is open. I would have to check that out actually, but that'd be interesting to research. If a business wants their own custom application, maybe they've designed their own security application that's got a log to it, can you create your own data connectors? I'm thinking probably, but I just don't know definitively. Something to think about at any rate. So as you can see, I've got 10 connectors connected. So that means I have quite a few of these other assets in my library. So once you've got your connectors wired up, you just kind of wait for the data to start to come into your Sentinel workspace. And under the hood, like I said before, you've got your Sentinel that's riding on top of a log analytics workspace. The way that log analytics workspace works is that those different logs from the data sources are coming in a streaming fashion. And as long as log analytics recognizes the log, which it would in this case because of these data connectors, it's able to reformat them into what looks like a data table, a database table, with columns and rows and that kind of stuff. And that facilitates when you're using that Custo query language. If you use SQL to query a relational database, you're probably familiar with the select statement and the where clause and the order by clause and different types of joins. Well, guess what? The Custo query language operates pretty much identically to that. So it's really quite user friendly for a SIM SOAR platform, in my opinion. Okay, so as far as these other assets, let's take a look. Let's go to workbooks. Workbooks, as I think I said, are these interactive web pages that contain a curated collection of data. Okay, so let's take a look. There's a whole library of templates that you can add from the built-in gallery. I've brought in 12. Let's take a look at Azure AD sign-in logs here. So I'll select it in the list, and I want to view my workbook. This workbook motif, if you want to know more about it, there's lots in the Microsoft Docs, of course. It's used in Azure itself in Azure Monitor. And these workbooks are eminently customizable. See how there's an edit button? Under the hood, it's all JSON. It's all JavaScript object notation. But you've got this library of different visualization types that you can base either on metric data or log data. And when you're using somebody else's workbook like this, you're able to benefit from what they think is most important to look at, which again is an accelerator for skill development. So here we're looking at the Azure AD sign-in logs workbook, and it's showing us sign-in trend over time. And this particular is a metric explorer chart that, does it allow me to click into it? It allows me to hover over data points and get a value. But, it is what it is. We've got some aggregations down here. Workbooks have a library of different visualizations. I don't know their names offhand. You can see a couple examples here. The traditional metrics chart up here. Here we have more of a histogram kind of deal, sign in by location. I am in Nashville, by the way, so I'm not concerned about this sign in. location sign-in details. It's just meant I want you to think thematically. What are the log entries and metrics that might be most useful getting started with a particular connector? And the workbook is a great place for that. And that's the idea. So I would encourage you to start with looking at some of those built-in workbooks and just see what's going on in those. Let me see, what would be another one that I've hooked in that would look good? Well, let me filter to show mine. Yes, my workbooks. What would be another one here? Let's see. Um, Defender for endpoint. Let's take a look at that one. View the saved workbook. So this one has a data table that allows us to customize the time range. And then what's this here? Overview. I'm not sure what that first one is. Let's see down here. MDE tables. Again, specifically, it's going to depend on who made the workbook. Internet connected devices for the last 2 days. I'd have to drill in to understand what this is trying to tell me more, but hopefully what I'm describing is making some semblance of sense. That's the workbook. The hunting comes in. The idea here is that you can use Kusto to go across all of your connectors and all of that data to write simple to complex queries. And because you're going over so many different types of data, you can use Kusto to create correlated queries. Show me all of my Windows Server 2019 member servers across all my hybrid infrastructure. Maybe I've got some in Azure, some on-prem, it doesn't matter, that are missing this particular hotfix, that have their anti-malware configured this way, and are you know what I mean? So once you get the hang of the language, it's just going to be creating or crafting the query that gives you the results that you want to see. And the idea with threat hunting is that you can run the queries that you want to on a schedule, or you can do it just ad hoc if you're in the middle of a particular kind of investigation. And these queries are all from the data connectors, as I said before. Actually, it looks like this one is showing us all of them from the gallery because there's a lot that I know are not in my data connectors that I used. Let me see if I can filter this list a little bit. Let's see. Run all queries is kind of interesting. This would allow you to run every single query in your library. Again, I'm kind of clumsy on this because I'm not a full-time InfoSec professional myself. I was trying to find a good one that is relevant to my connectors. Anomalous sign-in locations by user account. Let me run that query individually, and let's view the results in the KQL editor. If you haven't seen the Kusto language, I'd like to give you a couple examples. Unfortunately, this isn't the greatest place to start if you're learning Kusto initially because the threat hunting queries are really gnarly, and gnarly is my technical term for the day, which means they're pretty complex. But fundamentally, as I said, in log analytics, all the incoming logs are organized into these virtual tables that look like, data tables in a relational database. And when you construct your query, you reference a table, and then you use the pipe character with various keywords in the KQL language. Extend, for instance, allows you to create custom output, a custom column. The traditional example I always give there is where you want to concatenate a first name, a space, and a last name in your query results by taking the first name and last name columns. Looks like it's doing something similar here with location. One difference with KQL to SQL is project. The only thing you're doing with KQL is basically running selects. But when you're filtering on column names, whereas in SQL, you actually use the select statement for that. In KQL, you use project. So this is saying what columns do you want to see in your results. And it goes on from there. I found an excellent resource if you are interested in learning more about Kusto. I mean, I can give you a list of resources, but one I thought was really neat. And it turns out some colleagues at Microsoft use this internally, is kustoking.com. An MVP who I don't know, I don't think, uh, made this site. And he's got this Custo by level that you might want to take a look at, different use cases and example queries. I mean, there's a lot that you can do, but that's just one of a number of nice resources for helping you use the language. Let me get back to where I was here in Sentinel. So as you can see, you run your query, you can adjust the time range using graphical controls, or you can do it in your code. And then your results can come back as you see in a tabular view, and you can filter. If you've got lots and lots of columns, you can show the columns vertically with these little drop downs here. And depending on the data, you may want to visualize it. Notice that you can render the data with one mouse click as a graph, which I think is pretty cool. Now that would depend on what you're modeling here to have that be worthwhile as a chart. This one, it doesn't look like, I don't see that as beneficial at all. I don't know about you. What are some other top line benefits of using this KQL query language? Well, when you're doing threat hunting, maybe you're crafting a query that looks for log4j vulnerabilities in your environment, and you craft it in such a way to where it returns rows when the vulnerability is there, okay? So you want the query to return 0 rows whenever you run it. How can you take that query and make an automation? Well, you can, absolutely. As you can see right up here, you can create an Azure Sentinel alert. And this is a powerful aspect of log analytics, Azure, and Microsoft Sentinel. And basically what you're doing here is creating what's called a new analytics rule based on the query. And you might do something in your rule logic to when this query returns greater than 0 rows. I mean, have it run every 5 hours, every minutes, every number of days. Alert threshold, whenever it's greater than 0 rows, trigger the alert. So you might think, well, does that mean that I have to write a PowerShell script or something to run this on a schedule? No. What's great about these analytic rules that applies again both to Microsoft Sentinel and back in Azure and regular old log analytics is that these log search alerts are run automatically on a loop based on what you specify for your query scheduling by Azure. Now that's going to incur a little bit of a cost. You'll find when you work through this wizard interface, it normally will give you a preview of the expected cost. It's not a lot of money. I know that term, a lot of money, is totally relevant, but I think in my currency, USD, I think it's like $1.50 a month or something. I don't remember exactly. It's not meant to be a huge financial impact, but potentially super useful, I think you'd agree, because we can go to bed at night not worrying about, is there an outstanding log4j vulnerability somewhere in my environment, because we know that when this query runs, if it picks up a result, it trips off what's called, well, it depends on where you are. In Sentinel, it's called an automated response. Back in Azure Log Analytics, it's called what's it called? Action group. But it's the same idea. You'll want to have automation to run tasks automatically when that rule is fired. And something else that's a bit different, I guess, with Sentinel from Azure is that in Sentinel, it uses logic apps as its main automation. Why isn't it called logic apps? I have no idea. You'll have to ask the engineering team. They're called playbooks. But let me go back to Sentinel to quickly show you that. So if we go in the Sentinel down to automation, you can build out these playbooks that use as their trigger either an incident or an alert, including a log search alert like we were just looking at. And long story short, a playbook is nothing more than a logic app, and a logic app has a graphical interface where you can build a simple to complex response. So let me quickly use good old Google Images for a moment, if you'd indulge me. Let me see, Microsoft Sentinel playbook. I just want to grab a quick screenshot because I didn't have time to create one of these playbooks before we started. So if you haven't seen it, it looks very similar to, if you're familiar with the Microsoft Power Platform, the Power, is it Power Automate? Try, I can't remember. It's one of the Power apps. It uses the same engine as logic apps. So you've got, again, this library of connectors. And so we might say that if that log4j query trips, then we create a ticket in our IT system, we send the appropriate people email, we create a message in Teams, and then most importantly, we maybe put a filter, the sky's the limit, not to use a cliche. But what's powerful about these logic apps is that you create your trigger and then you've got this ability without having to delve into the plumbing of all these different REST API definitions. You can simply use the connector library to plug in just about any kind of Azure or non-Azure API under the sun and stitch them together as a workflow. And you can do things like conditional logic, if true, if false. You can do looping, iterative kind of stuff. You can do like for loops and that kind of stuff. So you should be able to map out whatever kind of automatic response you might need using those playbooks. And then as you saw, the idea is that you wire those playbooks to your analytics rules. The analytics rules, like I said, are just basically alert rules, and you can create them up here as well. Um, these are going to be of a couple different types. You see one, when you see fusion, that's an indication. This particular one is telling us that Sentinel is able to look at individual alert occurrences and do its best using machine learning to stitch them together in a coherent story for you. All right. So that's a little bit. I know I'm going kind of fast in the interest of time, and there's a lot here, and I'm trying to deliver as much value to you per unit time as possible. Remember that there's the recording as well, okay? I always tell my students that. If you don't get it the first time through, please make sure to make use of the recording. We've got this notion of it's different from workbooks, although the name's a little bit unfortunate because they're so similar. It's notebooks. And this is where you can conduct investigations. You can use notebooks for your threat hunting work. You can use notebooks when you have an incident where you need to formally conduct an investigation with or without your colleagues. And these notebooks make use of the Jupyter, Jupyter environment. Let me just grab one. Again, there's a whole bunch of templates that you can use to start with, or you can create your own notebooks. There's a couple beginners ones here that I'm firing up a getting started notebook. And this is asking me to sign in again. And you're going to notice it kicks me out of Sentinel and kicks me into ml.azure.com. The notebooks engine in Sentinel relies on Azure Machine Learning Studio for a couple reasons. One reason is that the AML Studio already has the Jupyter Notebook integration, as you can see. Number two, some of your work in Sentinel could definitely be made better with the aid of machine learning. You might be using Sentinel in conjunction with the Azure Machine Learning Service to train up a prediction model to help in a particular InfoSec scenario. You see what I mean? So I think it was really smart of Microsoft to wire up this integration. Now, this is extra money, of course, because you're going to have to stand up a machine learning service in your Azure subscription. And in order to use these notebooks, you're going to need a compute instance, which I've created before class. Because one of the value props of Jupyter, if you're not already aware, is that it gives you this markdown powered rich text. You see, I can show the underlying markdown syntax by double left clicking in the cell or double left clicking outside of it to see the rendered rich text. At least I'm trying to do that. There we go. So you're able to combine the rich text markdown to keep track of what you're doing in your security work, and you're able to run code cells right in line. Here we go. Here's a code cell. This looks like it's Python. But as you can see, the value proposition is that these notebooks allow you to run code live. And there are different kernels, as they're called. I'm sure that you've got more than well, there's R or Python in this case. There may be other languages supported. I don't remember offhand. But that's just kind of a kickstart in terms of the notebooks capability of Microsoft Sentinel. It's your center place for doing your investigations and running code and seeing those results and combining it with your documentation. Lastly, you can export those notebooks. They're just, when you export them, it's just a single file. Well, I think it's more like a zip archive, but it has the extension IPYNB. I think that's what it stands for. But the Python, the way that it works is that you could take those notebooks and bring them out of Sentinel and stand them up in another environment. As long as you've got the Jupyter runtime environment available on your system, you can export and import those notebooks in a very, portable and collaborative way. We're hitting towards the end now. My situation here, my Sentinel workspace doesn't have any incidents yet, and that's a good thing. But to take a quick look at what that looks like when there is an incident, remember an incident is where Sentinel sees a number of alerts that it correlates together. Microsoft Sentinel incident, I'll just leave it at that. We go to images, trying to find a high impact picture here. This isn't bad. The bottom line is you'll see graphical flows that show you how the alerts are related, and it gives you turnkey ability to create a notebook and an investigation based on the incident. And there's even, I like to describe it as somewhat of a ticketing system built into Sentinel where you can assign these incidents to other users. You might be responsible for triaging them, for example, and then you might assign a project or an incident investigation to a team or to another user. So you can see that the Azure Sentinel portal can really be the home or a home for your security team. Lastly, and then I promise I'm done. I've noticed that there's this free text search, which I think might be aimed at people who are just getting started with Kusto and they need to surface information really quickly right now. It looks to be a place where you can just do a free text search for, say, an email address or a string data or an IP address or something, and it will craft the Kusto query under the hood for you. So before class, I just typed in my email address here and hit search, and it crafted the query automatically for me. And then if we can view the search results, I'm not sure exactly what it's going to give back. But I think that again is just an element. It looks like it's going to be all activities across all of my data sources that reference my username. So I would have some refactoring to do here for sure. But I think the idea with that free search is again to reduce customers' time to impact in between when you create your Sentinel workspace and load up your data connectors and when you're starting to see actionable results. Hey, wait a minute, this is some stuff that we want to take a closer look at right now, and I don't have the time to go through workbooks right now. I don't have time to get on top of Kusto. I just want to get to what I need to get to immediately. I think that's the idea here. I like the way that the engineering team works here because they tend to do quite a bit of customer focused help. And that's a good example. All right, well, let me stop yapping and let me ask, what questions, comments, concerns do you have? I'm happy to help. If I can give you an answer, I will. Anybody?
Yeah, I have a question, Tim,
Okay.
and a statement. Thanks for all of that. I only like kind of like slightly knew what Sentinel was and Defender, and your initial description of all those products just like made my life better. So thanks for that. I'm curious about the MITRE ATT&CK preview on the left side. I don't know if you've used it yet, but isn't MITRE ATT&CK like a database of like thousands of attacks? Like,
hmm
does this let you simulate an attack on something, or what? Or is just like a log of those attacks that it detected? Do you know about that one yet?
The good news is that you have the right idea about MITRE ATT&CK. The bad news is that I don't know much more than that, unfortunately. If you don't know, and I'm speaking to the group now, the MITRE ATT&CK framework is meant to be a cross-vendor, more or less standardized way to define different types of data intrusion or cyber attack. Kind of like, when there's security incidents that are written up as CVE articles, a similar kind of standardization. So as you can see, we've got integration with that framework here. Whether you can model or do simulated attacks with it, I don't know offhand. That would be something where hitting the MS docs would be a good idea. But I think from a higher level, it's a great thing that Microsoft is embracing this standard. And we all know that the way Microsoft works now is that we've got this native integration with vendor standards and cross-vendor standards, which I think is just fantastic. It's one of my favorite things about Microsoft. So I hope that that was a validation, even if it wasn't a full answer to your question.
It was perfect. I just wanted to really see what happened when you clicked on it. I was
Hmm.
in a way, I was kind of hoping there'd be a cool button that says like simulate
Yeah,
this attack on this VM
yeah.
and it would like actually hack it.
Hmm.
That would be cool, but thanks.
Hmm.
Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Tim, if you don't mind if I add to that.
Please do.
So the way I've used this currently on my customer environment,
Hmm.
it's when I go to MITRE ATT&CK,
Hmm.
I want to see things like what's going on their network, how many reconnaissance, I mean,
Ah.
people scanning it.
Hmm.
So sometimes I may see a lot of failed logins,
Hmm.
and some of them might be admins, some of them might
Yeah.
not. Some of them might even be using login from previously known IP addresses.
Hmm.
So when I click that buy, so for instance, initial access, I go there and I see drive-by compromise, see like 4 or 15. I
Hmm.
want to investigate further. I want to know what's going
Hmm.
on.
Hmm.
So that's how this helps segment everything that I do on their network.
Wow. Thanks for adding that. That was
Yeah, it's
great
for incident
clarification.
response. Yes, thank you.
Hmm. So it looks like the MITRE ATT&CK is a dashboard where you can see live occurrences. Ideally, we want to see zeros, it seems to me, but we can see live data using this vendor neutral attack framework and then go from there to do additional investigation. Very good. Other questions? No? Okay. Well, you've got the slide deck. You know where to find me. My alias at Microsoft is Tim Werner. Thanks so much. Claudia, thank you for asking me again.
Thank you so much. Let me